Good morning in Washington, D.C., everyone. Welcome to this edition of Atlantic Council Front Page, our premier platform for global leaders. I'm Fred Kemp, President and CEO of the Atlantic Council. Today, we are delighted to welcome Senator Mark Warner to discuss the array of global risks and opportunities facing whomever is elected U.S. President in November. Senator Warner, I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'm in Istanbul, but hope to see you upon my return. This event is part of the Atlantic Council's bipartisan election year event series titled Elections 2024, America's Role in the World, generously supported by RBC Capital Markets, LLC. Through this series, we examine the challenging global context for 2024 U.S. elections and the stakes involved with wars in the Middle East and Europe, tensions with China, the contest for the commanding heights of technological change, and so much more. Writing recently in the Financial Times, CIA Director Bill Burns and the UK's MI6 Director Richard Moore set the stage this way, quote, "There is no question that the international world order, the balanced system that has led to relative peace and stability and delivered rising living standards and opportunities and prosperity, is under threat in a way we have not seen since the Cold War." We were delighted to host Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut earlier this fall as part of this series, and we invite you to stay tuned for future events, including one on October 30th with Congressman Michael Turner, Chairman of the House Select Committee on Intelligence. Since 1961, the Atlantic Council's nonpartisan, values-driven mission has been, put most simply, to shape the global future alongside partners and allies through constructive and collaborative U.S. leadership. In the aftermath of Second World War, the United States built a rules-based international order and has upheld and strengthened that order throughout the Cold War and to the present day, working alongside allies and partners to create a more secure and prosperous future for all. As the American people consider who to elect as their next U.S. president and who to elect to Congress, among other factors, they must assess who can best manage global challenges that are historic in nature. We're delighted to be joined today by Senator Warner. We're grateful for his longtime engagement with the Atlantic Council, including in his role as co-chair of the Geotech Center's Bipartisan Commission on the Geopolitical Impacts of New Technologies and Data. Before we turn to the conversation, Senator Warner, I'm delighted to invite Halima Croft, Atlantic Council Board Director and Managing Director and Global Head of Commodity Strategy at RBC Capital Markets, to introduce the Senator and offer brief welcoming remarks. Thank you again for joining us, and Halima, over to you.
Thank you so much, Fred, for those kind words. I'm Halima Croft, Board Director at the Atlantic Council and Global Head of Commodity Strategy at RBC Capital Markets. RBC Capital Markets is delighted to support this election series. Events like this one are essential for engaging democratic citizens and shedding light on the implications of potential presidential administrations and congressional candidates. We look forward to a vibrant conversation here today. Senator Mark Warner joins us to share his thoughts on the global risks and opportunities the next president must confront and how a potential Harris administration may impact U.S. foreign policy. Senator Warner has served in the United States Senate for over 15 years and serves as chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, where he has worked across the aisle to serve Virginians and the American people, including by crafting and negotiating key legislation on infrastructure, cybersecurity, and national security. Senator Warner believes strongly in democracy and election integrity and has underlined that both Democrats and Republicans must come together to respond to election security threats, especially the pervasive efforts by Russia, China, and Iran, stating a whole-of-society effort is needed to ensure our democratic processes are free from foreign meddling. Sir, we very much look forward to hearing your thoughts on how the next U.S. president should respond to emerging transformative technologies and intensified great power competition. We are also very honored to have my very dear friend, Brian Sullivan, moderating the conversation. Brian is anchor and senior national correspondent for CNBC. He previously hosted as anchor of CNBC's Last Call, Worldwide Exchange, and Power Lunch, and has twice been nominated for the Loeb Award. Before I turn it over to you, or to Brian, a couple of housekeeping points. This event is public and on the record. Towards the end of our moderated conversation with Senator Warner, we will take some questions from the audience. For those joining us virtually and in person, please submit your questions to askac.org, displayed on the screen now. And don't forget to include your name and affiliation. Thank you for joining us again. And Brian, over to you.
Halima, thank you for mentioning me, because Fred left me out. As a senator, anytime Fred's like, Senator, thank you, and you're looking at me like, what about old Sullivan here? No, it's an honor to be here. Halima is just the best. Fantastic person. Thank you so much, Halima. I've learned a lot from you. Let's jump right in. I mean, this is, the President Biden was supposed to be I believe in Angola today, but he did not, rightfully so, because of Hurricane Milton and disaster relief. And what's so fascinating about that, you think, why is President Biden going to Angola? No offense to Angola, but what would be the urgency of that trip? But if you know what Angola has from a critical mineral perspective, that all the advanced weapon systems that we are going to build, the neodymium magnets that control LIDAR, laser, radar, and all the stuff you know about that I don't know about, Senator.
Love to tell you, but I'd have to kill you.
Yeah, well, get in line, get in line. But this, I feel like from an energy security perspective, looking at China's almost ironclad grasp and hold on all these elements that we forgot about from high school geology and chemistry and biology, is that the next, quote, battleground?
Well, first of all, thank you, Brian, and thank you to Fred and in Istanbul for his comments.
Who's Fred?
Hey, you're not chopped liver, don't worry. But it's great to be back at the Atlanta Council. I warned Brian I wanted to make two comments up front. First, we're going to talk about all the challenges, but I just came back from 2 days of touring Southwest Virginia, where we were hard hit by Helene. Not as bad as North Carolina or other states, but and what I came away with, and as we think about Florida recovering now from Milton, the incredible amount of good folks, neighbors helping neighbors in the aftermath of this horrible storm, and incredible generosity of the American people. And it started with communities helping, churches helping. I've seen communities that are just devastated, but there is enormous resilience. And it's one of the reasons that drives me crazy with some of the disinformation that's being spread even in the aftermath of these storms. But a heck of a lot of good in this country that needs to be celebrated.
Thank you.
Now, I also mentioned that I want to, at the top, and I will do this in a non-senatorial way, I'm going to hit 5 spots that I think, frankly, even Biden could see some progress on. If not, the next president has to, that aren't getting the kind of attention that I think would warrant. One, and I'll kind of move from north to south and then west. The circumstances in Venezuela ought to be receiving more attention. We asked the Venezuelan people to come out and vote. They voted in record numbers. It was an overwhelming defeat for Maduro, yet we've not been able to rally nation states in the region, and prospects for that country I think are very dim at this point. And when Maduro is sworn in again, if we don't make some changes, we could see another mass of Venezuelans leaving, which would put additional strain on the border. Second, and it's something that gets virtually no attention, it goes to what you mentioned about China in terms of energy, is the increasing role that Australia and Oceania will play. I mean, there are dozens of island nations in that region of the world, many of which we don't even have an embassy in. The Australians do, thank goodness, and China does. But each of these nation states have coverage in terms of the amount of ocean they control, where there are these rare earth minerals, that are staggering. And for a little bit of attention, we could go a hell of a long way.
I know you got 3 more to get to.
I got 3 more, and they'll be quick.
College, so he said 2, and we said 5, so I did some complex math. You talking about like a Myanmar where they actually do the recycling of the lithium?
I'm talking about
Borneo?
Papua New Guinea. I'm talking about the Solomon Islands. I'm talking about Vanuatu. I'm talking about nation states that most Americans, frankly, probably I couldn't even identify a couple years back.
Is it because of the waterway? I'm getting back to World War II naval history.
It is getting back to some of that, but it's more the fact that that small nation state that may only have 100,000 people, they have, based upon what they claim is their ocean mineral rights, an area mass that may be larger than Alaska and Texas combined. And undersea, where a lot of these minerals exist, and we have ignored these nations. We're starting to put a little bit of time in, bringing them, frankly, broadband, partnering with our tech companies. Huge opportunity. Let me get through these next three because we're going to have a lot of topics. In China, lots of the normal stuff that we're going to talk about, but I think in energy, China is making huge gains. I'm a big advocate for reintroduction of advanced nuclear, small modular reactors. There will be a competition with China that we are engaged in. We need to move quicker. With that is what China's been doing in life sciences and bio. And just as nobody had heard of Huawei maybe 8 years ago, the company that I think will be on people's lips going forward is BGI, Beijing Genomics Institute. Huge challenges there. That was 3. 4, in the Middle East, obviously we've got the wars going on, but there is also a geopolitical move that I think could be one of the most transformative of the next 25 years as the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the other Gulf states, based upon their own decision to transform their economies to more technology-based, the race for data centers and AI, they, I believe, will make the decision to stop playing off against China and Russia and go with us because they want our technology. How we navigate that, the G42 Microsoft deal is the kind of tip of the spear on that, is something that needs a lot more attention. And then finally, a place where I'm spending a lot of time trying to learn, get myself educated, is the crisis in Sudan. There are more people dying every day in Sudan than Gaza, Lebanon, and Ukraine combined. And if America could show that we actually care about Africans killing Africans, and candidly, both sides in the Sudan conflict are bad. You don't have to pick a moral choice. Both sides are bad. A little bit of effort there, and that does wind back to your Angola question, showing that we care about Africa, where, based by about 2040, most of the world's population increase, all the rare earth minerals, a little bit of effort would go a heck of a long way. So those 5 top points, and I've got a 25-minute version of that, but that was my 3-minute version of topic. Back to your question. I think this competition with China on energy is one of the next realms of development. And you pointed out, it's not just extraction of the minerals, it's where the processing. Where China is really dominated is in the processing of the rare earth minerals. We can go head to head on extraction, and I think we're getting our act together better with our allies, Australia, Canada in particular, but we're also going to have to do the processing piece.
There's 5 things. You said a lot. It was excellent, by the way. It was almost a TV segment. And I think you blamed the media 3 times in that brief statement. But
not yet. That's the next question.
That's coming.
That's the next
why I'm here. I want to work sort of inverted into your order. Sudan is, I completely agree with you. I was trying to explain what was going on to my 10-year-old son and how it doesn't get any attention at all. It's just, there's just limited capacity, I think, sometimes I feel like there's limited capacity for human suffering from my end of the camera. It's just hard. Yeah. It just physically takes a toll, but let's kind of move in and out. Anybody here from California or Las Vegas? Okay. Anybody here driven from Las Vegas to LA or the other way? Okay. Next time you do it, when you cross into California, you're leaving Vegas, leaving Las Vegas, hopefully with not hungover with a lot of money, you're going to LA. The first or second exit is, you'll see a sign that says Baker. And then there's this weird looking mine. You know where I'm going with this. Up on the hill. It just doesn't look like much of anything. It's probably the most important mine in the United States. It's called Mountain Pass. And they produce neodymium. Neodymium goes into your phones all have them. It goes into every laser sight on these drones, advanced weapon systems. That, until recently, senators, that mine, which came 36 hours away from closing permanently before it was rescued, used to ship its dirt to China.
Right.
From the desert of California by truck to a ship to the center of China to be washed, and then they would ship it back to, I think, Oregon to be that's the stupidest thing we've ever heard, but I think it shows where the supply chains are really screwed up. How do we fix it?
Well, couple that with also, and I'm going to space off the mineral. There's a mine in western North Carolina that produces another key
Quartz.
component, quartz. Yes.
Sabelco is the name of the company.
That's pretty darn good, Brian. You know,
I'm not
you're
just, you know.
That's, yeah, I know. You're just not another guy.
I'm in the news. I know stuff.
You know stuff. But that, frankly, 3 weeks ago, I wasn't fully aware of all of the aspects of quartz. I think what we're going to have to do, and I think, frankly, I'm a Democrat, proud to be a Democrat, but I think even the Democrats got to realize we got to build stuff again in this country. We can't have a regulatory regime that adds 2 to 3 years of added cost, because time is money, to try to be able to, whether it's build a new fab or whether it's to make sure we've got a secure supply chain on rare earth minerals. And the fact is, even if we're not going to do all the processing here, we need to do it with our friends and allies around the world. And I think this is a huge opportunity. And I think there is a growing recognition of that across both sides of the aisle.
Oil is still relevant, obviously. Oil, I mean, the World War II effectively ended because in many ways, Germany ran out of oil. They just couldn't move their tanks because they were literally out of gas. My grandfather would tell me walking by tanks that were just there and they couldn't run. Mm-hmm. I feel like lithium, neodymium, praseodymium, cobalt, quartz, to your point, those are the new oil, right? And so it's gonna change strategic alliances. I don't think in 25 years of doing this, Senator, I've ever heard anybody mention the Solomon Islands. So
frankly, until a year ago, I wouldn't have mentioned it. So part of this is you got to learn. Part of this is, So
does that change APEC? So how do we, you're a senator, how do we adjust our alliances?
Recognizing that there are a series of nation states that most Americans couldn't identify that are in that wide space between Hawaii and Australia, and a tiny, tiny bit of focus there. Frankly, making sure that some of the undersea cables that our big tech companies are bringing across, actually, we get to either go through those islands, or they get an offshoot so they can get the broadband capabilities and connectivity they want, their people want and need. This is literally pennies on the dollar in terms of American investment, but it is where part of this next frontier. It's also one of the reasons why I think this competition around advanced nuclear. I'm all for solar and wind, but we're never going to power AI data centers on solar and wind entirely, because you need consistent 24/7 power. SMRs, I think, while not the complete solution, is that power source. They are safe, it is carbon free. And we saw, going back to your oil analogy, just as nation states became dependent upon Middle East oil for literally decades on end, you sign a 30-year contract with an SMR provider, whether it's from America or China, that means that country is kind of locked into that system. And many, many nation states want to buy our technology, but their question is, all right, if this is so good, America, why aren't you building more of these already? And what we've got in America is lots of interest. No utility wants to go first, so can we make a group purchase here? And frankly, the hyperscalers, the big tech firms who are going to need this power for their AI data centers, need to have skin in the game. And we are getting very close to, I think, some major announcements in this field, which is both good for American energy independence, American energy leadership, our challenges against China, and frankly, since this is carbon-free power, it's a winner across the board.
3 Mile Island, many of you of certain age, I call it statue.
Do you want to ask how many people here remember 3 Mile Island?
Yes. How many people here actually were alive when? Yeah, put your hand down, son. How many people were? He's like, well, I was just born. So 3 Mile Island is a nuclear plant, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It was shut down in 2019, but in 1979, they thought it was going to have a meltdown, like radiation, huge disaster, averted disaster. They're now they're planning, if the good senator and the folks at FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, agree to turn it back on, but they're going to use that power not to power homes, but to give Microsoft more data center access. Oracle wants to build a data center. It's 1 gigawatt. Energy's weird and confusing. Let me just put it in a TV news anchor way. 1 gigawatt of power is about 750,000 average size homes worth of electricity to run one computer center. He, and I mean the country, that controls the power, has the power. China's building nuclear reactors in 1/4 the time it takes us to build the one that we've built at Vogtle in Germany, or in Georgia in 30 years. Right. Why are they so much better at it? How do we get better at it?
Partially, they are willing, I think, to cut corners in terms of safety protocols.
Okay, with
You know,
nuclear, that doesn't seem like a good thing.
Not a good thing.
Okay.
And we've obviously seen, think about when China's Belt and Road Initiative, many nation states thought, oh my gosh, free stuff. And many nation states are kind of unsatisfied customers from China Belt and Road because one, China, they thought they were getting a lot of jobs. China imported their own workforce. The quality of the workmanship was pretty crummy in a lot of areas, and still they're deep in debt. So there is a reluctance, I think, to go with China, these other nation states. I think about many in Europe and elsewhere that where we are this close to signing SMR deals with. We need our own regulatory process to move quicker, and I think there's even been a sea change on nuclear energy. Again, looking at my party, where the overwhelming majority of Democrats know that has to be part of the mix. And I think there is even some changes on the NRC. I always thought it was more than a little bit hypocritical, is that when we walked away from nuclear from a number of years, yet we never said we're going to walk away from putting our sailors on nuclear-powered subs or aircraft carriers. And frankly, the power unit on an aircraft carrier is almost the equivalent of what I'm calling the small modular reactors,
yes,
which are
SMRs.
smaller, 200 to 300 megawatts, smaller, cheaper, safer. And it's been talked about for a while, and it's there are half dozen that are in process from small to real SMRs. We need many more, and we need to go ahead and get over this problem, because it was the Southern company that did the 1,000 megawatt station in Georgia. We need to kind of break through that concern about first of kind.
Yeah.
And frankly, the DOE's got literally billions of dollars available to help that take place.
I've been privileged in my career to go to a lot of different countries, probably not as many as a lot of people in this room, but 40-something. There's one country I will not go to, just because I'm a journalist. I'm literally afraid I'd be kidnapped, and that's Congo. I know, Halima, you've been to Congo. I learned most of what I say, I just regurgitate from reading Halima's notes, by the way. So, because to your point, you didn't mention it by name, but you were referring to Congo,
right,
in your China comments, importing the workforce. We're going to build you a beautiful road and a new port, right? Make a couple people really rich in the nation, and then have everybody just kind of work, and then they brought in their own people.
Right.
How do we prevent, and this goes back to the earlier comment about Angola, how do we prevent more countries from being sort of taken over in a way with Chinese dollars?
Well, we got to be in the game. And Angola was an example of a nation state that definitely focused more Russia-China historically. There's been a complete switch over. I think it's important that Biden still gets to Africa before the end of his term to honor that promise, but also to show the interest. And I think it starts a little bit, and I've been guilty of this at times. Sometimes even when we talk about this challenge, and we always kind of say America and the West, or America and NATO. Every time we do that, we piss off 2/3 of the world, because we are leaving out countries that would, I think, rather be aligned. I think there was a moment when China had with the Belt and Road, and people are, again, as my view is, they are dissatisfied customers.
Okay.
A little bit of attention, making sure that some of the tools we have, our Export-Import Bank, the Development Finance Corporation,
Literally right across the street.
DFC, they need a little more equity ability. They need to be willing to take a few more risks. And we can do this in concert, particularly with some of our European friends. And there is a sea change that's going on. Again, I think if you asked 5 years ago, if folks knew what the greatest export was from DRC, you get blank scares from probably 95% of the members. Now, the vast majority realize, you got 3 major mines in the Congo, and 2 out of 3 are controlled by China, and that is something that is a geopolitical and strategic risk, not only for America, but for, again, non-authoritarian regimes everywhere.
Because what the senator referred to, and you talk about the Sibelco, this Belgian company, a lot of Belgium references lately, by the way. My mother's Belgian, so it's good. Is all these little minerals, quartz. Well, we all know what quartz is, but this one mine in North Carolina, which got flooded, produces 95% of the super quality quartz to go into semiconductors. Right. So all these things that the senator's talking about are these minerals, again, we don't even think about, but every device you own, every car you drive, has probably 100 of them in some fashion in them, and a lot of them are mined in really weird, hard places. Lithium tends to be in a desert, the Atacama Desert of Chile, the middle of Australia. Now, those are friendly nations, but how much focus is there in the Senate on, to your point, educating, newer members, younger members, say, listen, here's why Angola, country we don't talk about geopolitically, is so relevant? Is it hard to break through?
I think it is hard. It is hard to break through if you're not on foreign relations. My view, if I have one overriding effort as chairman of the Intelligence Committee, it's to redefine national security so it's no longer just viewed who has the most tanks and planes and guns, but really it is a technology. National security now is a technology race with China. We've never faced that kind of adversary that is, the Soviet Union was a military threat, ideological threat. China is an economic near peer, in certain areas maybe even outdistancing us. And who wins the battle? 5G was the wake-up call for a lot of us as a former wireless guy. It is around energy. It is around bio. It is around some of the rare earth minerals. It is around a host of other domains that initially were not viewed. Quantum computing was not viewed as a national security. It's a national security issue.
Cheap plug at 1:30 and 4:50 today. I'll be on CNBC talking about these issues and how they may differ under each administration, possible administration, and that's kind of why we're here. But I always remind people, no matter who's president, we have this thing called Congress, and we have a Senate, and we have foreign relations. You, especially you, Senator Warner, and many others, are sort of running the show behind the scenes. Under either outcome, Trump, Harris, how much does that change your work? Or is it more relevant as to the ultimate composition of the Senate?
Newsflash, the vast majority of us in the Senate actually like each other and work together. I make
that doesn't rate.
Yeah, I know. I got to tell you, I make the joke. I work in the only place in America being a gang member is a good thing, because every time you have a group of bipartisan senators come together, you call the gang of this and gang of that. I got gang tats up and down my sleeves here. If I showed that off. And so if you look at every major piece of legislation, the last COVID package under Trump, there were a group of us that birthed the bill at Lisa Murkowski's house over a few glasses of wine and a meal. You look at the CHIPS bill, you look at the infrastructure bill, you look at the Electoral Count Act. These were all bipartisan efforts that started in the Senate. And I believe, regardless of who's president, that gang, and it gets hard. I mean, it's been frankly harder for my Republican colleagues. And folks, it was a great loss when we lose the Rob Portman and Roy Blunts and Mitt Romneys of the world, Richard Burrs. But there is, one of the things about the Senate is it's kind of like a high school you never graduate from. So somebody pisses you off freshman year, you can't stay mad forever because that person, they'll find another place where you can do business with them.
Yeah.
And sometimes, this will be my first crack at the media, and you guys are actually not as guilty as most.
Remember, I'm CNBC.
And I know you were. Yes, you were. That's still a fact-based news station. But if you're on the MSNBC or Fox,
no names.
You give a lot more attention to the loudest voices on the extreme who candidly never get anything done. And I appreciate the dig at the media. It's not the first, and it won't be the last time. And you're right. And it's so critical to remind people this and hopefully there's people watching at home. And hi, there's 535 of you in a full House. Right. 100 senators, 435 Congress people, and like 5 on each side get all the attention, and the rest are just quietly going about doing their jobs and probably many people in this room as well. So thank you for that. I think we forget that as well. Here's going to be the soundbite I'm going to ask you for CNBC later on today. Under either administration, we've got, for example, there's a huge Japanese delegation in right now. They want to buy our liquefied natural gas. I've been in Europe many times, Senator, on LNG ships, talking about what I call the Marshall Plan for energy. U.S. natural gas has saved Germany's tush, right? Most of Europe, but particularly Germany, after somebody blew up the Nord Stream. If you know who that was, could you let us know, by the way? And so how much would energy policy differ under Trump or Harris administration? Well, first of all, I'm not sure how many of Mr. Trump's threats to slap on 100%, 200% tariffs on every nation state, friend or foe alike, how much of that is bluster, how much of that is reality. I think that could have an effect because that would, even on energy flows. I do think more generally, I was a big advocate of moving to LNG, to allowing it to be exported. I think, again, that has allowed many of the European nations to move, I believe, permanently off of Russian gas. That is geopolitically to our and non-authoritarian
Should we
regimes.
end the pause on certain new projects?
There are a number. I would take a fresh look at a lot of those projects. I think we have to have a mix. The threats of climate change are real. We see that in these, once in a generation storms that happen every year now. But we're not going to flick a switch and make that transition overnight. And how we have kind of an all of the above to make that transition while we push, the greener. And this is again where I keep coming back to nuclear. And the nuclear area seems to be a place where, both the Republicans and Democrats could actually find some agreement.
The change in nuclear has been nothing short of remarkable. I mean, it's just, we're going to shut down. Here's something that's, anybody here from like the Massachusetts area, Boston-ish? I know Mark is. Yeah, Mark, I know, he works. Boston, in the winter, because you can't build a pipeline there, will import liquefied natural gas from Trinidad, and they have to import it from Trinidad, not from Houston, because the Jones Act, which was a shipping rule made 100 years ago, means you can't ship inside the United States. So there were, and you can.
You actually know this energy stuff really well.
Shocking. It is. There are days where Boston, to literally keep the heat and light on in Boston, they're burning trash. Actually burning filthy trash, polluting, gross stuff. I always ask people, tonight, you hang out with your friends, ask them what year did the world use the most coal ever? And they'll probably say, 1933, 1872. No, it's 2024. The world has never used more coal than it is today. And I bring this up, Senator, because you talk about liquefied natural gas and carbon emissions. Absolutely. But if they don't have that, guess what Germany's going to be burning instead?
Right.
Coal. Far, far worse. At least we do it as responsibly as any nation,
what
right?
you've seen are nation states like China and India who are, yes, they're building nuclear, China, but they're also building many, many more coal-fired plants.
Yeah.
And their view is, well, listen, the West did it for 150 years. Don't we get our time as well? And ultimately, that's not good for anyone in the world.
We got about 10 minutes. I got a couple of questions here. They're very smart. Thank you. By the way, smart crowd. Usually you get the why do you suck, kind of questions. One more before we go into this. You mentioned your first answer. You said BGI. I think it stands for
Beijing Genomics Institute.
I've never heard of it, so I don't know everything. Who are they and why are they on your radar?
They're on my radar because I think the place where AI could have the most effect is in life sciences. You think about a guy from a public company, Jason Kelly out of Ginkgo Works, I believe out of Boston. He basically said, you're thinking about AI models where we're trying to duplicate large language. Humans have spoken for a long time. He says AI can unlock the language of DNA, and because there is that they can do that at speed and scale that's unprecedented. Well, to have that happen, you need a hell of a lot of DNA. And BGI is basically scooping up DNA samples at an unprecedented level. They are doing the things that we managed to stop, and sometimes on the telecom side where they have investments in Western companies that is hidden and getting access to some of our information. And you combine AI and DNA mapping, and some of this gets spooky in terms of super soldiers.
You're spooking me out right now.
Super soldiers kind of stuff.
Is there any whiskey anywhere?
And I think this is the whole question around AI and bio is hugely important. And a piece of that is you think about synthetic biology, where you think about growing your energy or growing material sciences through a kind of a more life cycle basis rather than manufacturing it. And China is doing what they did in other domains. We talk about rare earth minerals, where they are building up a bio manufacturing capability. We have a little of that. The Europeans are further ahead in this domain, and frankly, some of those biomanufacturing facilities are shutting down.
What are they manufacturing?
Well, basically, there's a couple of them around the chemical process, where you kind of grow chemicals rather than produce them. I'm going to quickly get beyond my knowledge level.
But I know.
But it's and BGI is kind of BGI is to bio what Huawei is to telecom.
it's shocking. You think about the facial recognition. Now we're talking about internal, not the external, the internal.
Internal.
Literally our DNA and the race for the biologics. Couple quick questions here. How do you think either candidate should make sure adequate AI regulation is passed in Congress?
You know, I don't hold your breath, no matter which person wins. I mean, I still think one of the great mistakes we made in this country was not putting some guardrails on social media. Candidly, just in terms of mental health of our kids, you can almost trace the mental health issues of our kids simultaneously with smartphones in 2014 going up. So when Schumer had all of the AI big heads in, and they all said, of course we want to have regulation. They all say they want regulation until you put words on a page. And I am deeply engaged with a lot of these companies. I'm saying, you guys got to be for something. Now, do you do what the Europeans have overdone? We've done nothing. There is somewhere in the middle where I think smart regulation. I do think the California approach, and I'm usually knee-jerk against the California approach, but some level of liability regime on a nationwide basis for extraordinary harm. I think there is something there, and again, you had even Elon Musk for that. I think some of the areas, a number of states have already passed AI regulation in terms of deep fakes in politics, and that's the Alabamas and Floridas and Texas, as well as some of the blue states. I think that is a domain. I think we'll find out, Ryan, that you'll see major market manipulation using AI tools. If I was a bad guy, I wouldn't focus on a Fortune 100 company, but I'd take a Fortune 100 to 500 public company, and how you can use AI tools, not just deep fakes, but to manipulate stock prices. I thought that would be a spot. My view was, I thought if we could get capitalists and Democrats, small d, to say we shouldn't have AI tools mess with our markets and our elections. But again, so far we've done nothing.
So we kind of know the Trump doctrine, and because he has been president, Harris, assuming she wins, what would be her one or two top foreign policy priorities day one?
Well, I hope her top priority would be to continue to recognize we live in a dangerous world, and she served on my committee. I think she understands the seriousness of these challenges. I think she understands we live in a dangerous world, and our adversaries are not playing for second place. So I think continuing to realize whether, the challenge with China, I think, is the issue of our time. But I also think making sure that an authoritarian regime like Putin is not successful in Ukraine. I'm flabbergasted that Donald Trump in the debate couldn't say that, who he thought should win that war. And I think the Ukrainians said it's long-term a challenge. There's going to have to be a negotiation. But the fact that the Ukrainians, and this is about 6-month-old information, with, yes, military aid from us, but took out 87% of Russia's pre-existing ground forces, 63% of their tanks, 32% of their armored personnel carriers, without the loss of a single American or NATO soldier. I grew up, you and I both grew up, where we always thought the Russians and Soviets were our ultimate, Ukrainians have done that job in an enormously powerful way. And if we had not stood there, Putin would have been, clearly the Baltics would be under assault at this point, Poland and elsewhere. We, along with our allies, have to draw the line against authoritarian regimes. It also fills in a little bit into this question of realigning the Gulf states then, from playing both sides to actually saying they're going to make the long bet on us, not because of our values, but because of the quality of our technology. That would be a geopolitical switch that would be terrible.
I'm always careful to not characterize a nation by its leaders versus its people, right? Mm-hmm. China is not Xi Jinping.
Right, and
right?
I think,
and the Russians are not Putin. They're Russians, I'm sure, that hate him.
And I think that American policymakers particularly need to make that point, because every time, my beef is with Xi Jinping and the Communist Party. Right. It is not with the Chinese people. And failure to make that point, the Chinese Communist Party uses to great advantage on WeChat and the Chinese social media platform to say, you see, this is all racist, anti-Chinese screech.
When Putin is gone, and there will be a day when Vladimir Putin is gone, and the reason I brought up the point about the Russian people, what is the U.S.'s long-term strategic plan? I don't want to say for Russia, because that implies some sort of power or ownership, with Russia. What's Russia's ultimate role? A post-Putin Russia's role, do they come back into the fold?
Great
to
question.
your earlier point,
Great question.
They can't stay mad forever.
After the wall fell, after the communists were thrown out. As a business guy in the 90s, I went to Russia. I thought, boy, this is a country that kind of looks like us, seems like us, huge entrepreneurial spirit. I made investments. And, I thought Russia had turned the corner. They would have mass relocation of assets. Maybe it was a little bit crooked. We had the robber barons. I thought people would then want rule of law. We were wrong. The same thing as somebody that advocated China into the World Trade Organization. And I was a big advocate as governor of saying the more we bring China in, the more there's going to be a stable world order. That was the play until Xi decided in basically 2014 that primacy of the Communist Party was more important than raising the standards of the Chinese people. I was wrong again there. I think the world was wrong. So can we predict post-Russia Putin? I would love to see kind of a flowering of a more open Russia, but I think we have to be prepared for both circumstances. You could actually see Russia move further to the right or further authoritarian in a post-Putin era.
And very quickly, you mentioned Venezuela at the top, obviously humanitarian tragedy. I mean, just absolute, Maduro's going to be there for life, it appears. We used to go to the OPEC meetings, Halima and I, and the one thing that pissed me off about Venezuela was, the human tragedy. The Venezuelan oil minister at the time would show up with his wife. He's the only one that brought his wife, and she had like $3,000 shoes on, right? And I'm thinking you got people.
You knew that. I guess that's because you're CNBC.
She told Halima's like, those are $3,000 shoes. I'm a DSW shoe warehouse man myself, Senator. And it was like people are eating trash in your nation, and here you are showing up not only with your wife, but in these shoes and a bunch of shopping bags in Vienna. How do we solve How do we solve the Maduro problem?
We basically asked the Venezuelan people to get out and vote. They voted in overwhelming numbers, even in the hardest, Chavista barrios. And then the fact, the fact that we asked Brazil, Mexico, Colombia to step up, and frankly, they didn't. I think there still ought to be potentially another contact group. I think we should not take our eyes off of Venezuela. It is a humanitarian issue. It is potentially a border issue. And if we're not willing to stand by democratic results in our own hemisphere, what does that, what signals that?
Bad message. I'm getting it's flashing there. Anything you want to say in close that I might have missed?
Yeah, well, I'd like to take another Senate filibuster. No, we're down to 2 seconds. Thank the Atlantic Council. Think about those 5 regions. There are a series of others. I didn't hit on India, but I hope we get a chance to continue this.
Well, Senator, I want to thank you for being here today at the Atlantic Council front page. Just to be clear, I'm not being paid to be here. I just want to make that clear. I came down because Halima asked, and I wanted to see you again, Senator, and all my friends and new friends here at the Atlantic Council. An amazing conversation. It could have gone on for hours, but you got to run the country. Big hand for Senator Mark Warner, please. Thank you. Senator, thank you. Thank everybody for coming.
Thanks, folks.
Ladies and gentlemen, please keep your seats for a moment.